There's a medieval torture device so simple, it barely needs any moving parts. No blades, no fire, no elaborate machinery, just gravity and your own body weight. They call it the Judas Cradle. And for centuries, it was one of the most feared instruments in the Inquisition's arsenal. But here's what makes this story even darker. Unlike the Spanish spider or the Iron Maiden, the Judas Cradle was absolutely, horrifyingly real. We have the trial records. We have the victim testimonies. We have detailed descriptions of exactly how it worked. Welcome to Ash and Crown History, where we explore the brutal truths that textbooks avoid. If you're ready to understand one of medieval torture's most psychologically devastating devices, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what I'm about to reveal goes far beyond physical pain. This is a masterclass in breaking the human spirit. The Judas Cradle didn't just torture bodies. It weaponized gravity itself. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why even hardened inquisitors considered it one of their most effective tools. Let's talk about what the Judas Cradle actually was. Because the reality is somehow worse than anything Hollywood could imagine. Picture a pyramid. Now sharpen the point. Mount it on a sturdy wooden frame. That's your basic Judas Cradle, a spike, roughly the size of a human torso, pointing straight up toward the ceiling. The victim would be stripped naked and suspended above this pyramid point by ropes attached to their wrists. Then, slowly, methodically, they'd be lowered onto the point. The sharp apex would press against the most sensitive parts of the human body, the anus, the genitals, the perineum. But here's the crucial detail that makes the Judas Cradle psychologically devastating. You weren't impaled. Not immediately, anyway. The point was positioned precisely to cause maximum pain without causing fatal injury. The victim's own body weight created the pressure. And as exhaustion set in, as muscles cramped and gave out, the body would sink lower. The pressure would increase. The pain would intensify. Gravity became the torturer. And there was absolutely no escape. Imagine being in that position. Your arms are suspended above you, taking some of your weight but not all of it. Your legs dangle uselessly. Every muscle in your body screams as you try to lift yourself, to relieve the pressure for just a moment. But you can't maintain that position forever. Eventually, your muscles fail. You sink lower. The pyramid point digs deeper. The pain explodes through your entire nervous system. And the worst part? You're completely aware the entire time. The Judas Cradle didn't render you unconscious. It didn't offer the mercy of shock. You experienced every excruciating second with full clarity. This is what makes the Judas Cradle so much more terrifying than devices like the rack or the wheel. Those broke you quickly. The Judas Cradle could last for days. If you're starting to understand why the Inquisition loved this device, you're beginning to see the true horror of medieval torture. And if you want to explore more documented torture methods that history tried to hide, subscribe to Ash and Crown History. We're building a community that isn't afraid to confront the darkest aspects of human cruelty. Now let's talk about who actually used the Judas Cradle and why. Because understanding the context makes this even more disturbing. The Judas Cradle emerged in medieval Italy, probably in the 12th or 13th century, right as the Inquisition was consolidating its power. The Catholic Church had declared war on heresy, and they needed tools to extract confessions from accused heretics. But here's what's crucial to understand. The Inquisition had rules about torture. Detailed, bureaucratic rules. Torture was supposed to be a last resort, used only when other methods failed. And importantly, it couldn't leave permanent marks or cause death. The Judas Cradle was perfect for this twisted legal framework. It caused immense pain without breaking bones. It could be sustained for hours or even days without killing the victim. And most importantly, it left virtually no physical evidence. No broken limbs. No burn scars. Just internal trauma that wouldn't be visible in a courtroom. This wasn't random cruelty. This was calculated, systematic, bureaucratic torture. The inquisitors kept detailed records of every session. How long the victim was on the cradle. Whether they confessed. What they confessed to. Even the names of witnesses who observed the torture. We have these records today. They sit in archives across Europe, Spain, Italy, France, Germany. Cold, clinical descriptions of unimaginable suffering, written in neat clerical handwriting by men who considered themselves servants of God. Let me tell you about one documented case that reveals the true horror of the Judas Cradle. In 1591, a woman named Caterina was accused of witchcraft in northern Italy. The charges were typical for the era. Her neighbors claimed she'd cursed their livestock, caused a child's illness, been seen talking to herself at night. The trial records survive, and they describe in meticulous detail what happened to Caterina. She was questioned multiple times. She denied the charges consistently. So the inquisitors decided to apply rigorous examination, their euphemism for torture. Caterina was brought to the torture chamber in the early morning. The records note that she was shown the instruments, a common practice meant to terrify the accused into confessing without actually being tortured. She still refused to confess. So they stripped her naked and suspended her above the Judas Cradle. The record states they lowered her slowly and with great care onto the point. Her screams, the scribe noted dispassionately, filled the chamber. For 3 hours, Caterina endured the Judas Cradle. 3 hours of her body weight pressing against that pyramid point. 3 hours of muscles cramping and failing. 3 hours of pain so intense it defies description. And then she confessed. To everything. To consorting with demons. To casting evil spells. To attending witches' sabbaths. To crimes she had never committed. The inquisitors carefully recorded her confession. Then they removed her from the Judas Cradle. She could barely walk. The internal injuries she'd sustained would cause her pain for the rest of her life. 2 weeks later, Caterina was burned at the stake. Her confession, extracted through torture, was considered sufficient evidence of her guilt. This is the reality of the Judas Cradle. Not a Hollywood prop. Not a museum curiosity. A real device that destroyed real lives, all documented in legal records that survive to this day. But here's what makes the Judas Cradle even more psychologically devastating than the physical pain. The anticipation. Victims knew what was coming. The Judas Cradle's reputation spread throughout medieval Europe. People whispered about it in taverns, warned their children about it, feared it above almost any other torture device. So when you were brought before the Inquisition, when you were led down to the torture chamber, when you saw that pyramid point waiting for you, you knew exactly what was about to happen. This is psychological warfare. The fear of the Judas Cradle was almost as effective as the device itself. Inquisitors would often show the instruments to accused heretics, letting them see the Judas Cradle, describing in detail what would happen if they didn't confess. Many victims confessed immediately, just from seeing the device. They broke before the torture even began. This is what made the Judas Cradle so valuable to the Inquisition. It wasn't just a torture device. It was a tool of terror that could extract confessions without even being used. Think about the psychology of that. You're accused of heresy. You're innocent, but that doesn't matter. You're brought to the torture chamber. The Inquisitor gestures to the Judas Cradle and calmly explains what will happen. You'll be suspended above it. Lowered slowly. Your own weight will create the pressure. It won't kill you, we're very careful about that. But the pain? Well, most people confess within the first hour. Some last 3 hours. One poor soul lasted 7 hours before his mind broke along with his body. What do? Do you maintain your innocence, knowing what's coming? Or do you confess to crimes you didn't commit, hoping for mercy? This is the true horror of the Judas Cradle. It didn't just break bodies. It broke the very concept of truth. Under enough pain, anyone will confess to anything. The Inquisitors knew this. They built an entire legal system around it. The confessions extracted through the Judas Cradle were considered legal evidence. They were recorded, signed, witnessed, and used in trials. The torture became part of the judicial process, bureaucratized and normalized until it seemed almost reasonable. Now let's talk about something even more disturbing. The Judas Cradle wasn't used alone. It was part of a comprehensive system of torture, each device designed to complement the others. If the Judas Cradle didn't work, if the victim was stubborn enough to endure it without confessing, inquisitors had other options. The strappado would dislocate shoulders. The rack would stretch limbs. Water torture would create the sensation of drowning. These devices would be used in sequence, sometimes over days or weeks. A victim might spend an hour on the Judas Cradle, then be given a day to reflect on their situation, then subjected to the strappado, then another session on the cradle. This wasn't random cruelty. This was systematic torture, carefully calibrated to break the human spirit without causing death. The inquisitors were scientists of suffering, experimenting with different combinations to find the most effective methods. And it worked. Historical records show that torture produced confessions in the vast majority of cases. Very few people could withstand the combination of physical pain and psychological pressure. But here's what those records don't capture. What happened to the victims afterward? Even if you survived the Judas Cradle, even if you confessed and were released instead of executed, you carried the trauma forever. The physical injuries alone could be debilitating. Internal tearing, nerve damage, chronic pain that would last a lifetime. But the psychological damage was even worse. Imagine living with the memory of that experience. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the constant fear that it could happen again at any moment. Medieval society didn't have concepts like PTSD or trauma therapy. Victims were expected to return to their normal lives, to forget what happened, to move on. But you can't move on from something like the Judas Cradle. This is part of the Judas Cradle's legacy that often gets overlooked. We focus on the device itself, on the mechanics of how it worked, on the immediate pain it caused. But we forget about the decades of suffering that followed, the destroyed lives that continued long after the torture ended. Now here's where this story connects to today. And this is going to make you uncomfortable. The Judas Cradle is gone. We don't use pyramid points and suspension ropes anymore. We're civilized now, right? We've evolved beyond medieval barbarism. Except we haven't. Not really. The principles behind the Judas Cradle, using pain to extract confessions, systematizing torture through legal frameworks, claiming it's necessary for security, these principles are still with us. Waterboarding is the modern strappado. Enhanced interrogation is modern Inquisition speak. Guantanamo Bay is a modern torture chamber, complete with legal memoranda justifying every technique. We've changed the names. We've updated the methods. But the fundamental belief that torture works, that pain can extract truth, that the ends justify the means, remains. And just like the Inquisition, modern governments keep detailed records. They document everything. They create legal frameworks that make torture seem acceptable, necessary, even righteous. The Judas Cradle teaches us something crucial. Torture doesn't end. It evolves. It adapts. It finds new forms and new justifications. But it never truly disappears. Because the darkness that created the Judas Cradle, the willingness to inflict suffering, the belief that pain can extract truth, the capacity for cruelty disguised as justice, that darkness lives in every society, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we ensure the Judas Cradle's lessons aren't forgotten? First, we remember the victims, not as statistics or abstract examples, but as real people who suffered unimaginable pain. Caterina, who confessed to crimes she didn't commit. The thousands of others whose names we'll never know, whose stories were erased from history. Second, we recognize the patterns, the bureaucratization of cruelty, the legal frameworks that make torture acceptable, the dehumanization of victims. These patterns didn't end with the Inquisition, they're still operating today, just under different names. And third, we stay vigilant. Because the Judas Cradle's most important lesson is this. Any society, no matter how civilized it claims to be, is capable of systematic torture. All it takes is fear, legal justification, and enough people willing to look the other way. The Judas Cradle may be a museum piece now, but the mindset that created it, the belief that pain can extract truth, that security justifies cruelty, that some people deserve to suffer, that mindset is alive and well. Medieval inquisitors genuinely believed they were doing God's work. They thought torture was necessary to save souls, to protect society, to maintain order. They kept meticulous records because they thought they were on the right side of history. They were wrong. History has judged them harshly. But here's the uncomfortable question. What will history say about us? What modern practices will our descendants look back on with the same horror we feel when we look at the Judas Cradle? What suffering are we justifying today that future generations will find unforgivable? The Judas Cradle is a mirror, and when we look into it honestly, we don't see medieval barbarians. We see ourselves. We see the capacity for cruelty that exists in every human heart, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. The device may be gone, but the lesson remains. Torture never works the way its practitioners claim. It doesn't extract truth, it manufactures confessions. It doesn't protect society, it corrupts it. It doesn't serve justice, it destroys it. And most importantly, torture doesn't end with the torture chamber. It spreads. It normalizes. Creates a society where cruelty becomes acceptable, where suffering becomes routine, where the screams become background noise. That's the real legacy of the Judas Cradle. Not the physical device, but the mindset that created it. And that mindset hasn't gone anywhere. If this video made you think differently about torture, about justice, about the darkness that lurks in civilized societies, then you need to be part of the Ash and Crown History community. We're not here to make you comfortable. We're here to make you think. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me, what modern practices do you think future generations will judge as harshly as we judge the Judas Cradle? Share this video with someone who thinks we've evolved beyond medieval cruelty. Let's start a conversation about the patterns that never really end. Thanks for watching Ash and Crown History. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll continue exploring the dark truths that history tried to hide. Stay curious, stay questioning, and never forget, the distance between civilization and barbarism is smaller than we'd like to believe.